Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Ignition Time. It's very clear that President Biden is going to have to find a way to pay for the $3 trillion infrastructure package, to pay for the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, to be able to somehow deal with the massive deficit because the US government is now well over $25 trillion in debt. We are, as a country, the government is spending more money than it takes in. Now, as soon as an administration talks about raising taxes, you can see the opponents, in this case the Republicans, sound the alarm about how terrible it's going to be for our country and how awful raising taxes is going to be. I have done videos talking about how tax increases on the rich have the potential to actually hurt the middle class. So you definitely want to check out that video. But in a brand new video, Karl Rove, who's a former White House Deputy Chief of Staff and who currently serves as a Fox News contributor, and he is a lobbyist and he's a political consultant for the Republicans, talked about his concerns on how tax increases for the rich could lead to a reduction in GDP, a reduction in gross domestic product, a reduction in wages long term, and over 500,000 jobs lost if taxes went up. Basically, his argument is if corporate taxes go up, a lot of these companies will simply hire less people or will simply try and increase the workload on the existing people. And one of the things he didn't mention, which I mentioned in my video, was that if taxes go up, companies are likely to essentially contribute less to retirement plans, make cuts elsewhere, not invest in infrastructure, not invest in bigger buildings, in better computers, in better software. They are likely to cut costs somewhere. But let's listen to Karl Rove again, a former White House Deputy Chief of Staff, Republican strategist and Republican lobbyist, talk about his concerns with the massive tax increases that are planned by the Biden administration. And it's interesting to essentially watch him, in my opinion, fumble around and try and make a case for why these massive tax increases, which by the way haven't happened, but they are likely to happen. It's interesting to watch this strategist essentially fumble around and say, all right, this is likely to happen, that is likely to happen. Let's roll the tape, and then I'll give you some other important information about how these upcoming tax increases are now starting to face more and more opposition from different corners of the country. Let's roll the tape first and hear from Karl Rove, the Republican strategist and the former White House Deputy Chief of Staff on Fox. Let's watch.
Whiteboard Wisdom, Karl Rove, former Deputy Chief of Staff to President George W. Bush and Fox News contributor. Karl, great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
When you start hearing about investments in people and reforming the tax code, it's pretty easy to sort of translate what that means, right? Massive spending and increasing taxes pretty dramatically across the board. Corporations, I think, would be up about 9%. Here's Janet Yellen explaining the policy as she sees it today.
Investments in people, investments in infrastructure will help to create good jobs in the American economy, and changes to this tax structure will help to pay for those programs.
So that's how they see it done. Karl?
Well, that's not exactly what we hear. That may not be the reality. Last year, the Tax Foundation did a study of the Biden tax increase, and they said that if it were passed in its nature as it was last year, which is smaller than the $3 trillion we're talking about now, the GDP of the country, the gross domestic product, would be 1.6% less than it would otherwise be. The capital stock, that's the pool of money that we have to invest in new plants and equipment and manufacturing processes, and jobs would be down about 3.75%. The wage rates, the money that we would get paid would be roughly 1.15% less than it would be otherwise. And jobs, there'd be 542,000 fewer jobs than we would be talking about otherwise if the Biden tax plan, as it was outlined last year in the campaign, was talked about. All those effects would be even worse if the tax plan is bigger, along the lines of the $3 trillion you're talking about. Now, just to the back of the envelope scratches, how does that compare to the tax increases we've had before? It would be roughly equivalent to 1.4% of our GDP. That is to say, we've got a $21 trillion plus gross domestic product, the value of everything that's manufactured, made, sold in the United States, and it would be roughly $300 billion in that first year, or roughly 1.4%. It would be the fifth largest tax increase in America's history. The Revenue Act of 1942, we're fighting a world war, 5.6% of GDP. The Revenue Act of 1941, we're getting ready to fight a war and we're getting prepared, 2.2. The Revenue and Expenditure Act of 1968, height of the Vietnam War, LBJ passes a bill that represents 1.7% of the GDP. And the Revenue Act of 1951, we're involved in Korea and trying to rebuild Europe after World War II, 1.5. It would be the fifth largest tax increase in America's history if it were passed, measured by its share of the gross domestic product.
Yeah. And no discussion at all about cutting anything. I can't remember the last time I heard anyone propose cutting anything in spending, Republicans or Democrats.
It's all about spending more, more.
It's mind-boggling.
As all this is happening, the Democrats are gearing up to raise taxes indeed. Here's an article on your screen from the Wall Street Journal. Democrats weigh increases in corporate and personal income tax rates for households making more than $400,000 a year. And President Biden needs to raise revenue for the sweeping infrastructure and education plans. Now, I want our viewers and subscribers to understand that on the one hand, the government is spending more money, but on the other hand, the government needs to find a way to pay for all this. And the best way they can do so is by increasing taxes on the rich and those essentially who are the wealthiest amongst us. This is the goal from the Biden administration. This is what the Democrats are considering, and this is what is likely to face a significant amount of opposition in the weeks and months ahead. Time on Fox Business. President Biden raising taxes, you see the headline on your screen, would be a risky political move, according to a former Clinton aide, and a big tax hike is not a formula for economic recovery, according to Mark Penn, who's a former Clinton aide. In fact, here's what Penn just said. You're in the middle of a pandemic in which the leading economic spokespeople for the administration, meaning the White House Council on Economic Advisors, just said that we have a long way to go for recovery. So obviously a big tax increase is not a formula for economic recovery. So it's a risky political move to do a tax increase until the economy is on a stable and strong footing. And while all this is happening, CEOs are extremely concerned. In fact, they are sounding the alarm. Here's a headline of an article on your screen from CNBC. 250 CEOs and executives express alarm over what could become the largest tax hike in New York history. Now, the state of New York needs more money, is not doing very well. And so the state of New York is planning on raising New York state taxes. So folks, this is a fairly complicated subject because we're not only talking about federal taxes, we're also talking about state taxes. And some states are planning to raise taxes. So a group of 250 CEOs and business leaders sent a letter to the New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, basically saying that they were alarmed at what could become the largest spending and tax increase in the history of the state. Now, there were some significant CEOs, some very well-known CEOs who signed the letter, and this includes JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon, BlackRock Chairman and CEO Larry Fink, Pfizer Chairman and CEO, Pfizer came up with the first vaccine, CEO Albert Bourla, Citigroup CEO Jane Fraser, and JetBlue CEO Robin Hayes. So a lot of CEOs are basically saying to the state of New York, hey, don't raise taxes, because if that starts to happen, it's quite likely that more and more of these companies will relocate to other states like Florida. Florida has actually been saying, in fact, Senator Rick Scott from Florida said that people are leaving New York in droves to come to Florida because Florida has more tax-friendly policies as a state for corporations and individuals compared to, let's just use New York as an example. So this could be a major problem for some states, and it could lead to a relocation of individuals to other states. Remember, Elon Musk relocated from California to Texas, and this is something that states want to try and keep an eye on. They want to try and keep the best CEOs. They want to keep the best companies. They want to keep the biggest employers in their states because those employers rejuvenate and create jobs for those state economies. Finally, since the US government needs more money, one of the best ways to get more money is by making sure the rich pay their fair share of taxes. Here's an article on your screen from Bloomberg. The IRS should do more to nab wealthy tax dodgers. With greater resources, the agency could recover $175 billion a year. Folks, in the end, all of this comes down to money. We've seen the stimulus package, the $1.9 trillion stimulus package. It's been raining money. Well, not exactly, but you get the idea. It's been raining money, and this money has to come from somewhere. It could come from increased taxes on the middle income earners in the future, or it could come from increased taxes right away from the richest amongst us and large wealthy corporations. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Let me also know what you think of the rather interesting strategies from Karl Rove, the Republican strategist, who is an important influencer within Republican circles. As a Republicans try and find try and find a common ground, a consensus to try and attack these tax increases, because that is going to be the best political play for them. Politics is about timing, it's about opportunity, it's about tribalism, and it's about perception. This channel, the Ignition Time channel, is about the country, the economy, as well as your money. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you. Please click the like button, please subscribe, please enable notifications. That would mean a lot to me personally, and that helps out the YouTube algorithm. I assure you that Karl Rove, when he watches Ignition Time, clicks the like button, and President Biden, when he watches Ignition Time, he clicks the like button as well. Thank you so much for watching. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode of Ignition Time. Take care. Bye.